This is the third and final video for now, concluding my suggestion of a revision of the hypothesis of gravitational absorption, a thermodynamic revision. And as I was saying in the last video, there seem to be fluctuations in the motion of the moon, if my interpretation of everything I've read is correct, that are still unexplained by our traditional understanding of gravity and the rest of physics as we know it. These were fluctuations which were more aggressively attacked by physicists in the early 20th century, if you count the efforts of Bollinger and those with him as more aggressive than anything else that might have followed. And we might consider their attempt to consist of a simplified or a simple hypothesis of a slight gravitational absorption, such as during lunar eclipses. But because they did not seem to have much success with that hypothesis, although they did have some, the fluctuations in the moon were kind of forgotten. No other hypothesis did any better. And I'm not telling the entire history, and I'm not hitting some of the important details, at least not yet. But in general, that summary is not too far off. Really, however, an important detail is that part of the fluctuations in the moon were understood to be in the Earth itself. That is to say, there are fluctuations in the rotation of the Earth, which were established, if you want to say they were established by the divine creator at some point long ago. But as far as human understanding goes, they were discovered in like the 1920s and 1930s. By the 30s, they were pretty well understood. And these explained part of the fluctuations in the motion of the moon as apparent illusions. But if you go back to a 1932 paper by John Knight Fotheringham, if I interpret it correctly, he writes, or wrote, that part of the fluctuations in the moon remain as a legitimate phenomenon that has as yet to be explained by modern physics. And he also writes that the fluctuations in the moon and the fluctuations in the rotation of the Earth seem to be matched up somehow. They seem to accompany one another. Now, one of the thoughts was that the fluctuations in the Earth, at least, would be caused by movement of matter within the interior of the Earth. Basically, a change in the moment of inertia of the Earth, which would allow for the rate of the rotation of the Earth to change slightly without affecting the gravitational balance between the Earth and Moon as they are connected around as one system around their common barycenter. And it is important to be able to have one without the other. That is, change in the rotation of the Earth without having a change in the angular momentum of the Earth. Because as you probably know, we do have changes in the angular momentum from the changes in the Earth's spin over the course of the millennia. A slight deceleration of the Earth, or of the Earth's rotation over the years, from the tidal friction that is caused by the orbit of the moon. And that has an effect on the orbit of the moon as well. But as the physicists of the 20s and 30s understood, we could technically have a change in the moment of inertia of the Earth somehow. They suspected it was due to geological redistributions of matter within the interior of the Earth. We could have a change in the moment of inertia of the Earth without having changes in the orbit of the moon. And that seems to have been the final word on the matter. See especially Harold Spencer Jones' paper, The Rotation of the Earth and the Secular Acceleration of the Sun Moon, and Planets, 1939. But as far as the legitimacy of that supposition goes, that we have a change in the moment of inertia of the Earth, from the little bit that I've been able to try to read on the subject, I don't think that this hypothesis is very well respected. For example, in the Martin's source, which I've been referring to, there's only a slight indirect reference to this hypothesis. And the same general hypothesis was criticized in a recent paper by Lorenzo Iorio on the anomalous secular increase of the eccentricity of the orbit of the Moon, 2010. So part of my inquiry is whether, if I have interpreted Fotheringham correctly, part of my inquiry is whether the remaining fluctuations in the Moon, if there are those remaining fluctuations, and if they are a legitimate challenge upon our physics, as it seems that they are, if they are indeed caused by some kind of gravitational absorption during the lunar eclipses, could those fluctuations be the cause of the fluctuations in the rotation of the Earth? That's part of my inquiry, because, as Fotheringham told us, the two fluctuations are related somehow. That simply takes us back to Bollinger's hypothesis of absorption, which I have called the simple hypothesis. And to sophisticate this hypothesis a little bit, my only suggestion is that perhaps gravitation is related to the heat within matter itself and the orientation of that heat. To suggest that the change in the gravitational force pulling on the Moon from the Sun, pulling the Moon toward the Sun, the changes in that force may be correlated with the changes in the heat distribution of the Moon itself. And as that distribution changes throughout time, we should be able to see if the changes in gravitation match up with that. To falsify or support, if it be the case, this hypothesis, we could revisit the mathematics of Bollinger and Willem de Sitter, who carried out the same calculations. He did the same kind of work as Bollinger. Again, there would be a slight difference with those calculations if we go back and try to redo them. But I think any capable physicist could help me out and understand what kind of differences I'm talking about. And basically what this is here is I am reaching out and asking for help putting the hypothesis to the test in just this way. Obviously it would have universal implications. There would certainly seem to be several other ways anybody could try to falsify this hypothesis. In any case, I'm still looking for an attempt at falsifying or confirming it with regards to the lunar theory, in the same way that Bollinger tried to test his own hypothesis 100 years ago. But this time taking into considerations the change in the heat of the Moon itself and the distribution of the energy throughout the matter of the body of the Moon. If that gets us closer to explaining the fluctuations in the Moon, and if the said fluctuations could explain in turn the fluctuations in the rotation of the Earth, then instead of trying to, as I said, as physicists have tried to do, to find an explanation in the interior of the Earth, instead, if we can find an explanation gravitationally speaking first, then we don't have to try to find it geophysically. And certainly if the test does strongly suggest that absorption merits reconsideration, well, that would be pretty significant, to say the least. I think that's enough for now. I think if I can add anything, I think I would like to close with a quote from Newton. I have an old collection of philosophy from a friend, and it's called Modern Philosophy. That's all. Edited by Forrest Baird and Walter Kaufman. And there's a nice Enlightenment painting from Joseph Wright on the cover, a philosopher giving a lecture at the orrery. In this collection there was a selection from Thomas Reid. He was a common sense philosopher, Scottish philosopher, and there was a nice comment about Newton. He wrote, quote, "I agree with Sir Isaac Newton that power without substance is inconceivable. It is a consequence of this that nothing can be acted upon immediately where the agent is not present." End quote. And you see, that's my way of saying I would like to revisit the idea of gravitational absorption. Because what that quote was saying is, if you have a ray of gravitation spreading throughout the universe, propagating throughout the universe, whatever is in that ray or radiation, it has to be present. And if it is inhibited by matter in any way, if it is stopped by anything, then it cannot be present and it cannot do its job where it cannot go. I think we have a very physical universe, and radiation or energy is a kind of substance. If there's any hole in our traditional theory of gravity, which some physicists do not doubt, I think it is that part of the theory which says that gravitation can go through anything without any inhibition or any resistance. Philosophically, I think that has always seemed strange to me, and like I said, I'm not quite an expert, but I think we do have some grounds for revisiting the idea of absorption and put it to the test, as I've said. That should be all for now. Thank you for watching. There may be more to come in the future.